One. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. My name is Dave. This is the Radical Independent. Today I have a really interesting guest on the show. He's running for the governor of the state of Florida. I think that's just huge. He's on the ballot here in the state of Florida, which again, I think we need more voices, more choices, more ideas out there. And I want to welcome Hector Roos to the show today. How are you, Hector?
Doing good. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Yeah, no problem. This channel is devoted to kind of going down its own path, hence the name. And why are you running for governor in the state of Florida? We'll just start right there.
So there's so many people who complain about that, we don't have enough free market or the free market's failed us, either side of the debate, but that there's something wrong with the free market. In other words, we're not either getting enough of it or we're getting too little of it. And politics is one of those places where we want to champion, we want choices, but yet routinely we're only down to like two choices, and that's not the free market. Anywhere around in other Western democracies, for lack of a better word, they have 15, 18, 20, 20 something choices on the ballot. And here we find ourselves routinely just so restricted on what advances our point of view, what advances are the issues and concerns that we have, and we don't have any way to address that other than, hey, just run. Candidates need to actually just step up and run in other parties, not simply a Democrat or a Republican. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that in Florida we've had an interesting time. We basically have allowed the media to dictate terms to us about what's important, and try to crowd out a lot of the alternate voices or any crowd out really the debate. There is no debate out in the mainstream media. It is whatever they dictate. Yeah. So if our governor in Florida is popular, it's really because the media said so, not because he's actually done anything that merited necessarily. Yeah. If the Democrat's popular, it's not because, again, that Democrat has unmerited anything in particular in that area, but because the media said so. So, where are we now in Florida? The August 23 primary just passed, so the Democrats now have a candidate for the governor's election, which is the former Republican governor Charlie Crist, who served 3 terms in Congress at this point, and then says he wants to be the agent of change, right? And frankly, he defeated someone who was a homegrown candidate within the Democratic Party, didn't have to party switch or anything. That won a statewide election in Florida without the help of either Democrats or Republican establishment, which was Nikki Fried, who championed on the medical marijuana issue and opening up the market to everybody. And her election really just shocked the country when she was elected 4 years ago. So now she's on the sidelines. And I challenged Charlie Crist to say a thumbs up or thumbs down if you believe that medical marijuana is medicine and something that is vital for everyone to have access to. Crickets. So not surprising. And then on the other side, of course, we have the incumbent governor of Florida, who's Ron DeSantis, who ultimately got elected on the back of a popular President Trump, who just got off of winning his election for president 2 years prior. Mm-hmm. And he beat basically a well-funded establishment candidate who thought he had it in the bag. Everything had been, he was the anointed one, and came this low-key congressman out of Northeast Florida that nobody really knew except that Trump was backing him and we got to vote for him. So then there was a showdown in the general election where he almost lost, by a handful of votes, to a commissioner out of the city of Tallahassee, who was Andrew Gillum, mm-hmm. Who's now recently been indicted on public corruption charges by the FBI, who had the episode of being found, basically butt naked in a drug overdose in a hotel in South Beach. Yep. And the story goes from with a male prostitute, and the story goes where this is the class of politics that we have in Florida. Meanwhile, so there is a need for for alternate voices. Again, I cannot emphasize that more.
Yeah.
They're really making silly of Floridians and Americans for the most part. And the media has been saying that, you know what, give old Charlie a chance, or give old Ron a chance. He's not, you know, we don't like what he has to say, but you know, he has a right to say it, kind of thing. Except the rest of us don't have the right to say it if by his terms.
Yeah.
What do I mean by this? Let's, you know, I can. The point is, at the end of the day, is that we have a record on both sides that are really built up and propped up by mainstream media. We see it every 4 years, but now it's really influencing the governor's elections around the country. And you know, frankly, the mainstream media always picks the incumbents for the most part, and frankly, if they can actually elevate a governor, any governor candidate to a national platform, you can then encourage them to run for president. And in 2024, they'll do that too. I definitely see them doing that with the current incumbent, and with a couple other governors out there. You know, when they're setting up this, you know, a showdown that they, you know, at the end of the day, they're a form of entertainment. They're not really a form of truth telling anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where, and now I'm running as Libertarian Party of Florida's candidate here for governor. We haven't had a candidate here for, you know, for governor in about 6 years. So this time we're going, you know, we want to set the standard of what a libertarian is, because if you read some of the media reports or their takeaways, is that they've anointed DeSantis this authoritarian yet libertarian kind of governor in Florida, and you know, the next thing you know, they're going to lump all his ideas as libertarian ideas, when obviously they approach nothing of the sort. So setting the standard, establishing our name. You know, obviously I'm part of the movement that was tired of people who were not principled at their core with libertarian values. Running the Libertarian Party, you know, there's been a changeover from the Libertarian Party to people who are more centric on economic issues, on the viability, on being anti-war, especially, and of course on fighting against the debasement of the currency, or really these legal tender laws. Right. So, you know, that means that practically I'm running on a policy that says that we should defend our guard, shouldn't deploy them overseas without a declaration of war. That we should have you know, we should be allowed to transact with whoever, including our state government, with in cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. And that would be a pushback and a bulwark to inflation pressure that we see now. And obviously we need to be, I'm wearing the shirt flex or die, because I believe that Florida needs to start taking steps to take back its power, become more independent in the sense of the regulations and prescriptions that the federal government has imposed on the state. So what I mean by that, like energy policy, right? Why should the Florida rely on the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, which continues to deny applications for new nuclear power plants and clean nuclear in Florida, like they've done for the rest of the country, by the way? There hasn't been a new one in 50 years, give or take. So you know, we can set up our own. We can certainly take back. You know, we are number one for the potential for solar energy, for tidal energy. These are things that are simply, you know, we need to get away from the monopolies that are basically run by Wall Street. You know, so that for utilities, for medicine, for healthcare, these things have to just be broken down. Property insurance is an enormous issue this year, because it's basic. If you're in Florida, so a lot of people are being kicked off of their either the private or their public, you know, monopoly of property insurance, made to go and seek an alternative that can cost thousands of dollars more a year.
Correct.
I'm not talking about the low thousands, I'm talking about the higher thousands.
Yes.
Where that added burden basically means you can't afford your payments anymore.
Already happened to me, but keep going.
Right. So on top of that, of course, energy costs this year have increased at least 300%. For some people, it's been a lot higher. So like I use the example of Key West, where 1,200 square foot home, you would have paid $300. Now they're north of 700.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's going to be able to pay for these things.
It's insane.
And the reason why is they're all dependent on you know, traditional fossil fuels, which right now is you know, you buy it off of the open market that's now based on US dollars that have been debased. So everybody, everybody's costs are increasing as a result. We feel it in the energy sector because those contracts are denominated in dollars.
Yeah.
Or Federal Reserve notes, better yet said. So that's where we are. That's where we are in Florida. We're making the difference. No matter what, our voice is going to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
We're libertarians punch way above our own weight in terms of a registered voter population.
Yeah.
So the last governor candidate got north of about 300,000 votes, and we will continue to grow that. And the reality is, there's just a lot more libertarians outside the Libertarian Party than within the Libertarian Party. And part of my campaign goals is to put the word out. It's safe to come home.
Yeah.
You don't have to compromise your beliefs. You don't have to continue to vote for the lesser evil.
Right.
It's time.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I come from a more, I would say, more conservative background, or at least let me put it this way. Conservatives over the past 20, 30, 40 years have promised a lot of things, right? They've said a lot of cool things, and maybe 70% of which I agree with. The 70% of the stuff I agree with it never really gets done. We had the Tea Party movement. We had, hey, we need to shrink the size of government. Government's out of control. We need the 10th Amendment. We need the 4th Amendment. We need the 2nd Amendment, right? All these, and you hear all the rhetoric and you're like, yeah, man, that's my candidate over there. That's the guy I want to vote for, or woman, whatever. And it turns out, right, you've got one party which is going over the cliff very, very fast. You've got another party that ends up being almost like controlled opposition. Like, yeah, we're not going to do what they're going to do, or we're going to do it slower than they're going to do it, or we're going to manage it, right? This is, I hear all the time, we're going to manage the chaos. We're going to manage the crisis better. One of the reasons Trump, I think, was elected is because he's the businessman. He's going to manage the problem. And a lot of those things they just continue on the way they've always continued on, and nobody seems to notice. You mentioned the media. I think the media has a lot to do with this because, again, they shield information or they prop up information. I mean, I watch this garbage every day just so I know, right? It's one of the things I do in the morning with my wife, and we end up throwing things at the TV and spitting out coffee. It's not a good thing in the morning. It's just, I should probably do something more positive, but I want to know, what are they saying today? And your website, I think, was really interesting for me because I'm reading it and I'm going, okay, I've got conservative friends that if they read 90% of this, maybe even 100% of it, they would go, yeah, if this guy's serious, red flag laws, I mean, if you're for the Second Amendment, right, and you believe that, you have the right to bear arms without any of this sort of groupthink or wrongthink, as you called it on your site, people who are really for that issue would say, yeah, this guy over here, Hector, is better than anybody else on that issue. Put one in the Hector column, right? And then we've got, you mentioned the federal bribes. If you follow our policy, we're going to give you all of this money. If you're thinking the wrong way, though, you know what? And you see this on both sides, right? But a lot of the time, you'll get your funding based on, do you align on this issue? And I like the whole idea of being more independent. The Flexit thing is pretty interesting. Like all of these movements, I say to my wife all the time, I say, it's like what Tom Woods says about a divorce, like a national divorce. It's time to, these irreconcilable differences, I don't know if they're ever going to be settled in sort of a federal national way. I mean, we get more and more divided on so many different things. Well, two things, by the way, that I loved on your platform was the co-parenting thing, right? I am so tired of people in the education establishment and just in general thinking that they know how to manage children, and their parents want to teach them certain values, certain virtues, which the school is devoid of any virtue right now. And I don't want to go off on a cultural rant, but some of the things I'm seeing as, a 50-something-year-old guy makes my stomach turn. I'm sick to my stomach. And the first thing I would want to do is protect those kids, protect their innocence, right? And it seems as though we're moving at a rapid pace in the wrong direction on that. A lot of the time, it has to do with the fact that, hey, if you want this money from the feds, I mean, the Department of Education is useless. It should be abolished. It should be, I mean, you could go through a list of federal agencies that need to go. You know, the FBI has been in the news lately, and last night we heard the president talk about how the FBI, people need to defend the FBI and fund the FBI. Now they're all for authoritarianism when it's their brand. You know what I mean? Everybody's got their own brand of authoritarianism, and they need their police force or their agencies to prop it up. And it's tiresome, it's exhausting. And then when you reach out to your local state rep and they're like, yeah, man, I hear you. Yeah. And then I don't see any legislation. I don't see them, going to a microphone or a podium anywhere and pounding their fist and saying, look, this has got to stop. People need to have, the kids need to have their rights respected. Parents need to have their rights respected. You talk about during the lockdown era, as I like to call it, everybody failed. Everybody failed across the board. Some people, turned a little bit sooner. You could say Governor DeSantis turned a little bit sooner but there are still states, there's still people within these jurisdictions, Hector. The governor may have an opinion on something, but then, Broward County has their way of doing things, and it's like that stuff needs to stop. I mean, people need the freedom to make their own medical decisions, or not to do something. Their job shouldn't be dependent upon if they take a federally mandated product. And I don't even go down that road either, because this video hopefully will be up on YouTube, and they're not too happy when you start telling the truth about the last 2.5 years. I mean, I tell everybody I know, and I send messages on various platforms, and I get fact checked, and I get, here comes a little box to tell me about where I can find the closest Walgreens location, So it's insanity. I'm wondering, all of these positions, I think my original premise was, I mean, you must be reaching out to disgruntled conservatives and independents and maybe old school progressives, like from 50 years ago, like the Pentagon Papers crowd, people who understand that, personal liberty, right? Regardless of, some of the lifestyle choices you make, personal liberty is everything. If you don't have it, then you're not a free citizen. Am I wrong?
It is everything, but it has to be nestled in property rights.
Yeah.
Right? It has to be established on the foundation of property rights. You're not wrong to say that there's a lot of disgruntled people in society, and they keep voting to bigger and bigger numbers, and they see that it's not working. Because the point is that if elections, elections are the byproduct. They're the conclusion of the cultural movement. You have to win the culture war, for lack of a better word, before you can actually get your freedom. Right? You have to win. Like, I remember the gladiators in Colosseums. You win win the crowd, you win your freedom, right? Because that's really where it comes down to. We're built in a society that has that requires mass consent, like the consent of the governed in huge numbers. And if you have just enough that do not consent, somewhere around 5 to 15% that are very loud about it too, that they actually, that's enough to have these government programs canceled, actually, or not pursued. They can even be left on the books, but not pursued. I mean, that's really where it comes down to. That's really where the political change happens. It's political change always. It flows downhill from cultural change. And right now we're fighting a culture of both in our institutions, whether institutions, whether it's our family, whether it's our schools, whether it's in our own governments, whether it's in our own churches, places of worship. We're fighting this culture that says that that government intervention is good, that there's somebody else out there that knows more than you do about your own life and is better equipped than you to make those life decisions for you, your family, your children, and your business.
Right.
So that's really where we have to start fighting, pushing back against. I recently announced my running mate is Pastor Jerry Tubb Runnable. out of Jacksonville. You know, why did I pick a pastor? Because at the end of the day, I wanted someone who knew how to communicate and communicated. You know, he said it beautifully. He said it beautifully to me, and really on the press release too, that the church, the Christians, or even people of faith, have to just stop using government to try and force other people to be good Christians, right? I mean, that's really where it comes down to. You know, at some point when
I want to stop you there because this is really interesting, and then I'll let you continue. But Christianity as a faith, I'm a Christian. I don't run around yelling at people or anything, but what I've noticed over the past 10, 20 years, maybe longer than that, is Christianity has become the religion of nice. In other words, if you're nice, then you're a Christian. You're nice. You don't really even have to believe any of the doctrines. I don't know what denomination or whatever you belong to, but it's come down to they take a couple of things out of context, and then they base their entire walk with God in that context, and it drives me crazy because I'm like, okay, you're supposed to meet, right? You're supposed to meet to worship, and you're telling people, this pastor up in Georgia, Andy Stanley, said something like, yeah, it's really important to get groceries, and it's important to, do all these things to get to the store, but it's really not that important to get to church. And my head just exploded. I was like, you have got to be kidding me, dude. I mean, one of the things about whatever faith you belong to, or even if you don't, but if you do, right, the foundation of the country essentially was, right to worship. I mean, this is, I hate to break it to people, but when they landed here, in Plymouth and on Cape Cod, they were fleeing tyranny. They were fleeing people that said, no, you got to worship the state the way the state tells you to worship, right? So here we are, I don't know how many years later, and it's the same thing. The state basically has influenced all of these institutions, education, the church, and now the church has become this compliant whipping boy. Basically, yeah, I'll do what you say. If you don't want us to open, we're not going to open. It's not a big deal because we have Zoom and we've got all these great things now. Technology is so wonderful, and then there's no human connection. All right, and that has, and I know you probably already know this. This has affected our kids. They're learning, they're not learning. They have to see faces. They have to be able to communicate. You've got kids out there with learning disabilities, for instance, who couldn't get that validation during that whole thing. And I mean, how many years did this set everything back? And we just submitted to the tyranny. I'm sorry, I went off on a larger tangent there, but
well, let's I'll segue back to that. So the real record regarding the lockdowns and the tyranny that happened over a presumed medical pandemic.
Right.
Why do I say presumed? Because the evidence, the declaration did not meet the evidence even two or 3 years later. Mm-hmm. Where are the numbers, right? Is it really significantly higher than a bad flu season? Not really. I haven't actually said that before, but the reality is that that's the data. That's the science.
Yeah, I know.
So was it worth disrupting everyone's lives to do? No, absolutely not. To fight a cold or to fight something that was only affected a small segment of the population in any case. Right. The reality is that, but Florida, let's put it this way: the mainstream media that has reinvented what actually happened in Florida. So not only are they calling people like Ron DeSantis libertarian, but they're starting to say that Florida never went into a lockdown, that didn't have any restrictions. And I'm looking around at people I know that like are public school teachers, and they're looking at me and they said, we just got our masks off this March. Like that's 2 years later.
Yeah.
From 15 days to stop the curve.
Right.
To stop. Yeah, exactly.
I know.
So and it was only back in November, less than a year ago, where the FBI was, again, the FBI was calling us angry parents who saw their parents suffering through these restrictions, even after the declaration of emergency from Ron DeSantis was set aside last year, only last year, by the way, that they're still going through those restrictions, and they were so upset showing up to school board meetings all over the state that the FBI would declare them, these angry parents, domestic terrorists.
Yep.
So that's really the Florida I'm looking at. The facts of what happened in the last 2 years are very simple. The governor, like many others, declared the state of emergency based on the guidelines from the CDC. Set up this broad, just a very broad emergency, established the parameters for local governments to declare their own local emergencies with their own restrictions. Everyone was, obviously coerced or forced, social distancing, stay-at-home orders, curfews, and then of course the central, there were he created in whole categories along with the county governments on what was considered, whether you were considered essential or not, and whether you could go to work or not.
Yeah.
And so some people, the with the obvious trend that people say, oh, but he quickly did it. Okay, so for 400, his emergency order stayed in place for 475 days. That's the reality.
Yeah.
And so it changed. He had a graduated reopening schedule, which only meant that that some people were free and others were not. That's really what it meant. He created two kinds of Floridas, and if you extend that type of tyranny for such a long time, not only do the people get used to it and accommodate to it, but the local governments treat that as actually a norm. Oh, you're used to this, so we're going to keep doing it even after the emergency is over.
Yeah.
So, and that's really what happened to the school boards. So, and of course, the federal government was giving them extra money for it too. So it wasn't anything. It's business as usual, really, is what converted. Why was 475 days so important, though? Because at the end of the day, under the emergency declaration, the governor had the exclusive right to write checks on an emergency basis, award contracts, give money away. He, to obviously to create, it basically created the largest system of graft, right, in Florida history. To the extent that he couldn't even find enough money to spend money on, that Florida ended up with a surplus, a record-breaking surplus. And in the meanwhile, that though, as how that sounds, turned to actual policy, and the governor signed 4 tax increases, including the internet sales tax in Florida. So so people are complaining now about cost of living increases. Yet we have a governor who actually just basically who increased taxes on you and me, who didn't resolve property insurance, obviously, which has been a disaster, and just made cost of living in Florida a serious issue in this election. But the media is not talking about it. The Democrats aren't talking about it. The Democrats have refused to be really, other than don't say gay, they've refused to be an opposition party because they're essentially 99% lock in step with Republicans in Florida. And Republicans in Florida have essentially made the state the most how do I say this? Not simply through red flag laws, but other policies as well, like age limits for purchasing firearms, extended waiting lists. They've made the Florida one of the most unfriendly states that are run by Republicans, by the way, to people who support self-defense, the right to self-defense, or Second Amendment as a result. So come spin up now. I mean, that's really the facts. I wanted to make sure that that's really what everybody understands about what happened. 475 days. You know what happened like within a week or two after that? After the 475 days was over, California started to reopen.
Yeah.
So that was the only impetus that, oh, why are we still under a declaration of emergency if California is reopened fully, right?
Yeah.
So that was really, it was to grab that power at the end of the day. All this emergency talk, like anything else, like every time we hear about this, has always been a grab of power, and we're no different here, except it was at the state level. Of course, there's a lot of strings attached to it, so that's why no one wants to talk about issues this election. They always want to talk about cultural issues. I believe it wasn't necessary, for instance, for Roe versus Wade to be decided this way, or reversed, when ultimately, if I'm personally pro-life, but I definitely see that, and I see that under Roe versus Wade, which has been basically the law of the land for 50 years, selective abortions were on the decline immensely.
Yeah.
And not, cultural norms had changed. People, both people just not getting pregnant, not even it just basically not even starting families later. And of course the issues, it was essentially in in decline compared to other years. So all of a sudden, the decision just created this issue, this noise, more cultural war issues.
Yeah.
That was simply, simply a different. It was the next cause, right? The next cause now is that we have to fight for these issues of life at a state level now. This is now, but that's where it's been thrust upon us. And if you're not on our side, then you're not really pro-life. And here we go again with all this nonsense that we've been hearing for 40 years.
Yeah.
So I truly want people to say, as a libertarian candidate, my goal isn't to say that that social issues are not important. They are. They certainly are, especially to me, and I'm sure to you.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that listen to how they're running government. They're running government in a way to basically increase, to basically take away your property, either through taxation or through seizure. Because basically, when you have such property taxes increasing, property insurance increasing, they don't want you to own property. That's really what it comes down to. It's an attack on private property. And it's just like saying, oh, if we want to increase the income tax to 100%, it's the same argument. They're basically doing it with through all these other means. And at the end of the day, the only solution though is what I believe is decentralization. So when I say that Florida needs to take back power from the federal government, start regulating its own issues, and then eventually trying to get rid of these regulatory issues, trying to restrict or minimize the restrictions and the regulations altogether. That is what I mean. So why do we have the Second Amendment? So that we don't really because the First Amendment failed. Let's be honest. The Second Amendment right to self-defense is a decentralization to the person for security, right? When was it dial a prayer 911 doesn't work, what are you left with, right? I'm watching on Instagram about a person walking out of a restaurant in downtown Miami with their grandmother that they haven't seen in years, and because he's black and she's not, grandparents, right? The police officer locally just tased them and arrested him because they're walking out and someone thought he was taking advantage of her. Right.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is what we entrust. This is what's trained. Even if you oppose the state, you're going to face consequences, and you're going to have to explain yourself later. In fact, the whole thing about red flag laws, the same thing with civil asset forfeiture, the same thing with saying obey a lawful command, kind of talk, is the idea that you are presumed guilty and you have to basically prove your innocence. Our justice system, our legal system in the United States has always been built on the premise that you are presumed innocent and need to be found guilty beyond the preponderance of the evidence.
Yeah.
And the reality is that all these rules, all these emergencies erode the rule of law, erode private property, and frankly erode self-awareness, self-independence. And create a dependency society, right?
Yeah.
Where even it's not about consent anymore. It's not about consent of the governed. It really ends up being about simply the consent of the rulers, who owns the guns, and that's why the conversation always kind of goes in this. It sounds negative, but the reality, because what does it mean, right? It means force of arms. Just because someone puts on a uniform or has a title that says they are an official, does not mean that what they say can still violate your private property, your person, or your conscience. And really, that's what we've been seeing. And we need to we need to really roll back the state. But obviously, after 50 years of arguing this point, the Libertarian Party just turned 50 years old. It's obviously the conclusion after all that is that we can't roll back the state. It's impossible to do so because the real strategy is actually typically has always been to decentralize. Whether it's the individual who opts out of the system entirely, votes with their feet, and goes to somewhere else that is easier to live with, like so many people have come to Florida with, escaping their California stand or their or their New York way of life, right?
Right.
And a New York City way of life, because not to
upstate's not as bad. Yeah, way upstate,
right.
But yeah.
Right. So this is, we have to be able, this is what it comes down to. I firmly belong to in this camp, in this movement that believes that we have to address these issues we have to be very clear about how we address these issues. And, we believe the Libertarian Party rather than like the Republican Party, forget the Democratic Party for a moment, have the, is the best and clearest way to be able to project this issue forward.
Yeah.
So rather than getting involved with basically other people who are running a political party for business.
Yeah.
The Libertarian Party is a party that exists on ideas, on an ideology. It's very clear. So and that's why we need candidates, because candidates at the number one is the number one way to recruit people into the movement, because this is basically our greatest advertisement. And I was convinced I was how do you say, inspired to become a libertarian, to learn about libertarianism through the example of Dr. Ron Paul, who was running as a Republican at the time, but solely actually, without the intention of winning necessarily that Republican primary for president, but because he knew he could reach out to people, and his whole team believed in that message, and they did. They reached out to millions of people, and in 2012 they almost secured. They were close to securing the nomination. But again, you find out that political parties are a private club, and you have to deal under their rules, and they can change the rules on a dime.
Yes.
So that's ultimately a lot of us who served back in those days look at the Libertarian Party and say, this is why we need our own party, right? We need, and the Libertarian Party is called the Libertarian Party. And mind you, we a lot of us from back in those days, we looked at the Libertarian Party who spent 2020 not basically not saying a word against lockdowns and mandates.
Thank you.
Right, they did legitimately, and that's why we said there's no political platform out there for people to complain or to resist what's going on,
right,
outside of little pockets in smaller states, particularly, or in larger states. But basically, we have this idea that that the Republican Republican-run states got it right. Very few of them did, maybe a handful of them, and then of course they're just not perfect. But at the end of the day, I argue, for instance, that the Governor DeSantis in Florida, it's not that he resisted lockdowns, because he certainly did them. It's not because he resisted emergencies, because he had kept them for years open. But it's really all he did was contradict. That says that the reason I don't disagree with the emergency, with the lockdowns, I simply disagree with the basis for locking everybody down. If you can prove the basis to me, I'll do it again. I'll lock everybody down, no problem.
Yeah.
And that is a sad difference that people don't notice regarding the policy pieces, or the projection, or the manner of how Ron DeSantis governs. So that for me, there's no better reason for a libertarian to stand up now and say, we should do it differently. This is the way to do it. And my campaign is about making sure that people know that there is a different way of doing it, that there is a libertarian approach to doing things. And that for those who have already been introduced to this idea, that are sitting on the sidelines and going, what do I do? I'm just telling them, come home. We've prepared a place at the table.
Yeah.
So
that's good. I mean, I like the way, when you say come home, there are a lot of people who've been, the definition of insanity, they vote the same way, and this time it's going to work, right? This Republican or whoever, this person, they said X, Y, and Z, and then it turns out that, they were fundraising off of it. They weren't 100% serious. You can pass a law here and there to placate some people and think like, progress is being made. But, like I was listening to Tom Woods one time talk about the educational system and how we continue to kind of tinker around the edges. And yeah, going to school boards, 100%. Go to the school board, yell, scream, shout, do what you need to do. Run for school board, try to take it over if you can. But the system that you're operating in it's like you're jumping into the cesspool, and you're trying to purify the cesspool with a person here, a person there. Now, granted, locally you might have a lot of success doing that, but when you've got this national thing that comes down, and infiltrates and takes over and tells you this is what you must do. You talked about bribery on your website, right? About, bribing federal money. Here comes some more federal money. Just, hey, this poster has to go up in this school, right? Or you're not going to get federal money. And parents see the poster and they go, holy crap, what are my kids learning at this school? And you got younger kids. And again, I don't want to go back into the culture war here, but this is one of the reasons why people are fired up, because they've never seen anything like this. And it's almost like the federal beast, because it's, I don't know if you want to use the word woke or whatever, I don't really care what you call it, but parents were kind of blindsided. And it's just like everybody else who gets involved in an issue, they're like, hey, I don't want to take this medical product. I don't want to take it. And people keep saying, but everybody's doing it, right? And you think to yourself, seriously, we're in a clown world. We can't function as individuals. And then you get gaslit day after day by the same media, by even people in so-called more right-leaning media. They basically tout the same line, but maybe they couch it in different language. And to me, it's all like encroaching statism. I think of Russia, right? They're surrounded by NATO, right? To switch subjects here. And people say, well, Russia, they're such an aggressive country, man. If they had just allowed NATO to just go in and take them over, everything would have been great. I don't know why they're even fighting when we all know that, the people in Ukraine, they're the ones that are the victims. And I don't want to go down a foreign policy road here, but I'm assuming you're not a neocon if you're a libertarian, right? So,
obviously.
I'm pretty much guaranteed that almost every Republican that you push on that one issue that's bankrupting the country, you can go back trillions of dollars over decades now and say, hey, our federal deficit is what? Like 30 trillion bucks? And
that it won't even matter at the end of the day, because we're not going to be able to pay that off.
Right.
And functionally, we're not going to. So let me point out that everything you just described, I'll add on their student loan debt forgiveness, right?
Okay.
Everything's designed. What's the reaction? The media, particularly the right wing, has been, or conservative media, whatever that means anymore, has basically ushers in, and they do this on the left too. This idea of you have to be angry about that. You have to be upset about that. You have to have your moment of rage. Like, a lot of people do actually end up getting up in the morning, turn on the news, and they have that moment of rage. Rage is a particular energy that you have to be able to cultivate, and you have to use that rage as energy to propel you to change something, not simply throw something at the remote control or the sock or the shoe.
Well, I apologize. It's just something I do in the morning, man. You got to.
No, it's we all do it, but but I'm functionally telling you that it's on purpose to get you to be upset. So if my statement about the debt forgiveness or the student loan debt forgiveness was if people put as much energy in being upset about that as they do about lowering taxes, government would be so small that nobody would care about it. Nobody would care about any of this. The reality is that they are, these politicians and bureaucrats are using our own resources against us. So take away the resources, starve the beast, and you'll notice that tomorrow things will change very quickly. So that's why I think I think if there is a silver bullet to the state, it does involve decentralization. Well, particularly does revolve around us taking back our control of our monetary policy. Where they're free, they're going to tax us if they can't tax us directly with their income tax, sales tax, whatever form of basically appropriation of our private property they're going to have, then they're just going to do it through inflation. They'll print more money, they'll devalue our savings, they'll devalue the value of our goods and even of our time, and then they'll pay for it that way. So until we learn how to get away from that monetary system, then we need to do that in order to actually defend our liberties, our freedom at the end of the day. That's where I believe we have, when we have a mass adoption of cryptocurrency, people using cryptocurrency, it's not that difficult at this point. Everybody has some kind of plastic card in their hands already. They have little chips on them. You don't even have to slide. You can just tap, and that most and a lot of cryptocurrency providers do use those now.
Yeah.
So it's only a matter of time before we get to mass adoption, where we're actually transacting directly with one another, not denominated in US dollars, but denominated in some kind of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. And that will go a long way. So I firmly believe that Florida should simply start accepting, as state agencies, start accepting cryptocurrencies as forms of payment, and then get the dollar completely out of that equation, encourage mass adoption. And that's those are the easy. That's actually some of the easier things you can do,
right,
in terms of and why? Because I'm in Miami, and in the city of Miami did it. So I'm not sure.
cool.
There's no reason why if a city can't do it, the whole state can't do it. So
Yeah.
at this point, I feel like we're getting there. We have the tools to. We're starting to see the framework, and not just the tools, but the framework to implement them on a mass scale, to openly just declare our freedom in these areas, right? So a lot of people declare their freedoms of medical choice by simply ignoring the mandates, or on the other side, is or they will go get they're declaring their freedom and getting a medical marijuana card, and saying, I don't care what the feds say, and they're seeking their own solutions, and they're declaring their freedom in these areas. So we need to continue this. We can't shrink back. And this is a message that works for everybody. It's not simply a right wing or left wing question. This is, if you care about this choice that you want to exercise, and you distrust what the politicians have been telling you for years, and you distrust their friends in the corporate media, and keep in mind, I mean, the six news networks are all owned by conglomerates.
I know
that are crony capitalism on fire. So in other words, what kind of life do you want to live? First of all, we have elections are just choices. They're choices on preference. So declare your preference first on a ballot. It's not going to do any harm,
right?
And if you believe that if voters believe that they must vote for the lesser of two evils, explore why. Because the reality comes down to is that if say for some strange reason that Ron DeSantis does not win re-election for whatever things he did or didn't do, that he didn't earn it, and a Democrat wins, right? The reality is that the end of the world doesn't happen the next day. What happens is actually the supermajority Republican legislature starts to craft laws to restrict the powers of the governor.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, that's actually far better situation than a supermajority Republican legislature and a Republican governor who, in hindsight now, exercise unlimited powers. To tell you, when you should go out, when you should go to work, when you should buy food, when what you should dress in, and ultimately when you should be able to express your voice, and go to church, express your religious preference. At some point we have to understand that this is, ultimately, I'll say it like this: government grows on the basis of crisis, whether it's their own meditated crisis like the war, or through some accident, and they'll always take advantage. The rules for radicals, right? Never
let a good crisis go to waste.
Go to waste, right? So in other words, but there's Smedley Butler, a general a general from World War II, would said that war is a racket, right? That the idea, but if you expand the idea of who's the war against, and these days we have more wars against Americans themselves,
correct,
than people overseas. We're not necessarily the targets of drone strikes, but we are the targets of our bank accounts are being monitored. Our where we go, and locations being monitored, where our political and social preferences are and of course our taxes, how we spend our money, how we spend our money, and those preferences are monitored for tax purposes, for control, and ultimately that's not so scary until they actually start to do something with it, right? So when you're on the outside of being the unpopular what did that Biden say last night when he went like this and said, everybody being radicals of some sort. The reality is that there's always a war against somebody, and because at the end of the day, there's three rules in politics. One is One is that if you can, well, and the first one is a lie, right? The first one is that good people have to, that good people are obligated to vote for the lesser evil, right?
Right.
You know, and you have to make them feel that way.
Yeah.
But the other one is that the politicians are risk averse. They never actually want to do their job, right? That if they can avoid it, that'd be best. And two is that politicians are pain, or try to avoid pain as much as possible.
Yeah.
Which means they don't want to look bad. They'd rather look good. They want to be they receive accolades, not derision, not complaints. And ultimately, those are, you know, the people ultimately have so much more power, even in small numbers. You know, it just has to be organized and directed in sufficient causes. I mean, look at what Moms for Liberty did. They basically single an organization that's directed by parents who the angry parents and school boards.
Right.
You know, even without a lot of outside help, they basically convince people to go run for office in school boards, and they must have won like 10 school board seats around the state.
Yeah.
Just because they knew, just for trying, you know, just out of trying. I think they won one in Miami-Dade County. They won several. I think they won two in Brevard County.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some runoffs elsewhere that are still happening. But the point is that, you know, it's really about trying. The politicians want, you know, say, oh, it's not a big problem, I'll take care of it, and they kick the can down the road. But kick the can down the road really just means wasting your time, waiting you out. You know, because obviously, and all bureaucracies are like that generally. They say, oh, your rage is only limited, your attention span is limited, so I'm just going to wait you out.
Right.
And the reality is that unless you and I, or people listening, don't plan to be here in a couple of years, then we probably should remain invested in this process for years to come. And that's really the idea. We don't, obviously nobody wants to care about government and what politicians are doing or not doing, whether the kids are making deals with Ukraine and smoking crack and videotaping themselves to prostitutes. That's, you know, that's the mess they want to sell us on, that we should be paying attention to, not and be angry about, but not the things that happen down the street. Because ultimately, you know, we have to, the reason why decentralization works, the reason why taking back Florida, taking back its power from the federal government works, is because you have you know, this federalist model in that's tied in the U.S. Constitution doesn't simply create this idea of separation of powers between the different branches of government, but it does so, which is a horizontal checks and balances. But we have a vertical checks and balances between the federal government, state government, and lower governments. Therefore, right. So, in other words, a governor can't tell a sheriff what to do. A president can't tell a governor what to do, and so forth. You know, they're all these are competing sectors, and of course, one state can't tell another state what to do. These are competing the zones of sovereignty that actually are designed to protect individual rights and property rights.
Right.
So we have to actually go back to that. That's why this centralization is so important. It's not that we know the federal government's lost. We have to face it. It's, you know, no one trying to pin our hopes on someone in the federal government to save us is only going to produce more of the same, because it's captured by the crony capitalists, you know, the Wall Street or hedge fund barons.
Yeah.
Some of them aren't even Americans, right? So whether some of them are CCP or in China, or some of them are in England or Europe, and the reality is that, you know, if that's captured, fine. We never needed them in the first place, and we need to recognize that. Right. And we need to be able to just figure out, you know, what can we live with, right? And we need to get to the basics, not be distracted by, you know, this constant drum beating of, you should be upset about this issue today or that issue today, or Joe Biden going like this and reminding me of that movie V for Vendetta and Let There Be Blood. I'm like, what is this? You know, this is Hollywood.
That was just, what a speech. I mean, the speech he gave where he told everybody that his patience was running thin. I said, I've never heard tyranny like that. But last night, I think they successfully topped the other speech. And look, like you said, use the energy, harness the energy, make it so you're active locally, make it so you pay attention to the issues that are going to to affect you directly. I think what you're saying about decentralization is right on, and I think you need to have more people understand that, hey, this was designed originally so the individual had all the power. Now we've given the state all the power, and now we've created people who want the state to control and do things. And that's a dictatorship. That's not. It's a monarchy, or it's so far from where we started. And it was an easy, really a very quick, rapid disintegration when you look at our history. But typically, countries with really good constitutions and really good ideas, typically they only last a couple of hundred years. So I'm kind of with the whole national divorce, and if we could just be, if Florida could be an independent state or country, or however you want to look at it. I know that's freaky. Some people just freak out and they hear, oh, we're going to be, and you hear things, like, didn't he say yesterday at some point you need F-15s, or, if you want to take on the government, you're going to have to have really big firepower to take. And that sounds so ominous. Like, don't step out of line because we've got missiles. We've got, aircraft carriers and bombers. And it's like, holy crap, what happened to, liberty and freedom? And it's in the individual, and it's almost as if you have even a thought out of place now, they're going to come down on you. And I think people have to recognize, if they don't push back individually in their own lives and tell other people, hey, I know what you're thinking about this over here. You think this is a great idea and the government's going to forgive your loan. But guess what's going to happen next? There are going to be consequences. Maybe not right away, or maybe at least you change your ways after.
Well,
that,
I think in Florida we're at there is a danger, because we have Democrats and Republicans agreeing on so much.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I said earlier, the Democrats aren't really opposing Republicans on anything, because they agree with what's happening. So what is actually happening, right? So we've had the legislature pass several measures to restrict free speech, the right of protest, right of assembly, and even in some counties, the red flag laws were already part of that. Where if basically you find yourself in a situation where someone's claiming that you're mentally ill and you own firearms, then without due process, you can get a knock on the door with a warrant saying we're here to collect your guns, and if you refuse to recognize it, they can escalate. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. These things can be, obviously, it's simply arbitrary and capricious.
Yeah.
Now, what's that application of these laws? And obviously, most of the sheriffs in Florida are elected Republicans.
Yeah.
So they're the ones who are basically using these tools to their max potential. I would even go one step further. So, for example, they are actually taking it one step further. So in Pasco County, for instance, there's the sheriff there. I can't remember his name right now. So he's actually his agency is being sued because they have instituted a policy that literally is pre-crime. They have a computer-based program that says, oh, this person has a record or XYZ, that basically extrapolates when they're probably going to be committing a crime. And they literally have deputies going and knocking on their doors and checking up on them, and using it as with the conversation, as the conversation goes, they use it as a measure to actually get into the home and find out and try and find what crimes are happening that they've been told may be happening. So no one's calling it in. It's just pre-crime. So they're being sued by the Institute of Justice. I mean, and these things can be normalized amongst other sheriffs. So that's pretty part of the problem. That is something that, unless we put a stop to it, it grows. On the other side of that, the guy who just won as the Republican Commissioner of Agriculture candidate, who is the Senate President Wilton Simpson, his claim to fame is that he is the architect of the red flag law bill in Florida, and he's promised to run for governor in when DeSantis leaves to go run for president. So now you have somebody who is an avowed gun grabber. Basically, red flag laws are just another form of gun confiscation. It may not be understood that way because it's simply how it's targeted, but
Right.
really it's gun confiscation.
Yeah.
So you have someone who wants to be governor who has this type of ideology, and that's why I say it can get worse, right?
Mhm.
And frankly, I think that I've never seen. I mean, I had to really think about this, whether what's a bigger danger, the Republicans would lull everybody into a false sense of security,
Mhm.
or potentially a Democrat who you're already going to be wary of.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's really what it comes down to.
It's interesting.
Yeah, frankly, I did jump to the election a little late, so I knew what I was expecting to do. I knew my mission was to inform the public, rally people who identify like I do, that there is a limit to what politicians and bureaucrats can do. We used to call that limited government,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Remember?
And but we have and even on the places where we're doing better, like on this idea of school choice, right? Where that back in the day, it used to be called parental rights, because it's funny how like the vocabulary got changed,
Language.
and
Yeah.
now after COVID, now we really recognize that it really is, and with all the cultural issues, right, that happen in schools, we really do need to get back to calling it parental rights again.
Yeah.
The right, the parents, that because that the parents, for the matter, are entrusted by virtue of nature, right?
Yes.
With the children, with their children, rather than co-parenting government agencies and politicians saying what happens.
Yeah.
And if you may not be aware, but or your listeners might be aware that Florida has one of the worst track records in dealing with wards of state with their juvenile and elderly protections.
Yeah.
They're losing people all the time. And there's always citations of unfortunately of basically child prostitution rings that are being run out of state agencies like that.
Yeah.
We really and this, but we have to be worried about drag queen time in another state. That's
well,
that's another. I mean, the mainstream media wants you to talk about.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with that. I think the shock of seeing the whole drag queen stuff for some people is a motivator. I'm not going to say it, but I have heard CPS as an agency, um, pick your state right now. There are
Yeah.
some, if people were really paying attention what's going on with that one agency, I think you'd have another movement. You might have. I think what happened during COVID and what's been happening in general, the FBI raid, for instance, on Trump, I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact in different areas. It's like, whoa, where do they get? Because they don't think about this every day. They're just trying to, make ends meet and pay for the heat, pay for the groceries, pay for the electricity, whatever it is they're trying to do. Here in Florida, obviously, it's the air conditioning. But one of these issues pops up and people go, do they have the power? They say, do they have the power to do that? And at one time they didn't have, and they technically don't have the power to do that. So I think it's good to have you in this. I'm going to kind of wrap things up here. I just wanted to, because you and I think we could probably talk for 4 hours and just talk about all these different issues, because it's just nice to talk to somebody who's really awake to just some of these huge government overreaches that a lot of people have just accepted as the norm. This is the new normal. We heard that after 2020, and we're still, by the way, we are technically, I think, still in the new normal. I mean, these declarations that they made, nobody really took anything back. Yeah, they ended this here or that over there, but technically, to have any kind of an emergency, there has to be a justification for it. And if there's no justification for it, there shouldn't have been an emergency in the first place. And I think some people are waking up to that, but because of the news media and because of just this constant, gaslighting, whatever you want to call it, people, you walk around, being in Lee County here in Florida, I still see people walking around and they're still wearing their article of clothing will say that they're part of the team, they're part of team government, or team tyranny. And I almost just want to say, look, don't you want to be free at some point? But they don't think like that anymore. It's hard to reach. So I think we've got a big job to kind of not just deprogram, but it's almost like recondition. It's like you got an old couch, it's a leather couch and it looks like hell, and maybe you can fix it up. It's a poor analogy, but you could recondition, reupholster it, make it look like new. I mean, we've got a great Constitution. There are a few things in the Constitution that are maybe some people don't think were good ideas. But for the most part, and states have constitutions and you can amend those constitutions. I mean, we should have the consent of the people in the state, right? We should have, rather than politicians being dictators. And, we hear the lesser of two evils all the time, that this guy, DeSantis will be the lesser of two evils, right? Most likely is that the way people will frame this, even if they, they might want to vote for DeSantis because he's not as bad as Charlie Crist, who's, it's crazy that he was a Republican, he's a Democrat. The way he talks now versus the way he talked 30 years ago, it's scary how someone could just become whatever, but it's all for money, it's all for power, it's all for media accolades. You seem like a working class guy. You have a background in real estate, and you told me you're working in supermarkets and all this. Is there a shot that you could be in a debate with Charlie Crist and Ron DeSantis? Is that a reality, or is that something that you just don't foresee happening?
It would be nice, but I'm expecting it would be nice. I haven't heard anything yet. I'm going to put out I'm basically put out the challenges online, and asking people, answer these questions. Let's have the debate that people want to hear.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if my goal in this campaign, everybody's goal this election, should be to look to their neighbors and say, if we think this way, if we align this way, we shouldn't have to. We shouldn't need the debate to tell us how to vote. Because we know we already have a track record of where these guys are coming from, whether the Republican or the Democrat. What will send the message is how those votes come down. Yeah. That's really what will send the message. You want a debate? Vote. You want, because ultimately, I even think that win or lose, Ron DeSantis set up himself or the media set himself up so thoroughly on a national scale, mm-hmm. that even if he loses, he'll probably run for president anyway in 2024. But I know for a fact that if he does win re-election, he will be running in 2024 for president. There's no doubt in my mind.
No doubt.
So that's what we're going to. People can't invest in more of the same, especially if what we've been seeing the last 2 years. There has to be reciprocity. There has to be. We have to take charge for ourselves. I think the least that we owe ourselves and our families is just vote. Vote different. Vote libertarian.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. Vote libertarian. I want to thank Hector Roos for being here today. He is running for governor of the state of Florida. This is a big deal. This isn't like, not to say running for, dog catcher isn't a thing, and you shouldn't do that. But I mean, here's a man willing to challenge the status quo. It's very difficult for third-party candidates. I do believe in the libertarian message. When you boil it all down, libertarians tend to be right about most things. We look at Dr. Paul, you talked about, who is a hero now. The people who didn't like him 10, 20 years ago, they're like, yeah, of course, Ron Paul was right. I mean, of course he was right. He was right about the war. He was right about the Fed. He was right about all these issues that have all come home to roost. And I know you're a fan of Dr. Paul, and that's all I needed to hear. When you said that, hey, I'm a Ron Paul guy, I was like, yeah, I definitely want to talk to you. So that's awesome. So good luck with everything.
Thanks. And if anybody wants to find me, I'm Roos for Florida on all my socials, and my website's roosforflorida.com.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to cue that up. I should have asked you. Yeah, so it's roosforflorida.com, and you're on Facebook too, right?
Right. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm on TikTok too.
And there's got to be a big donate button, right, for crypto, right, on your main website, right?
Yes, you can actually. I'm accepting crypto through PayPal.
There you go. All right, Hector Roos. Best of luck to you, sir. And anytime you want we can chat again about maybe one issue and maybe keep it a little shorter. But best of luck out there on the campaign trail.
Thanks for having me again.